Something interesting happens once a retirement portfolio crosses about $2 million. The lifestyle often doesn't change much at all. You may still live in the same home, drive the same car, spend in familiar patterns. But the questions you start asking change quietly and gradually. Earlier on, the focus is usually very straightforward. Can I retire? Will the money last? How much risk do I need to take to make this work? Those are accumulation questions. They're about building, growing, and reaching a number. But once you cross this level, those questions tend to fade into the background. Instead, new questions begin to take their place. How do I avoid unnecessary taxes that quietly compound year after year? How do I keep flexibility as required rules start to take over later in retirement? How do I make sure one decision today doesn't quietly limit my options 10 or 20 years from now? This is why retirement planning feels completely different after 2 million. Not because you've won the game, not because everything suddenly becomes simple, but because the nature of the risk changes. At this level, the biggest threat usually isn't market volatility. It's income showing up at the wrong time. Taxes stacking in ways you didn't anticipate, and loss of control as mandatory rules begin to dictate the plan. This is the part many people don't realize. The strategies that helped you build a $2 million portfolio are often not the same strategies that help you manage it efficiently for the rest of your life. Hi, I'm Doug Mincer, president of the Mincer Group. Today, I want to walk you through why retirement planning changes so dramatically after you cross roughly 2 million, and why continuing to think like an accumulator at this stage could quietly create problems later on. We'll walk through how the risks shift, why flexibility starts to matter more than pure growth, and how planning decisions begin to compound over time for better or worse. If you find this helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Number one, you've mostly solved the saving problem. For most of your working life, the challenge is simple. Save more, stay invested, keep contributing, and let time do the heavy lifting. That message works, especially for disciplined savers, and for many households, it's exactly what gets them to this point. By the time you reach around $2 million in retirement assets, the saving problem is largely solved. Now, that doesn't mean spending is unlimited, doesn't mean there's no risk, and it doesn't mean every retirement decision becomes easy, but the core uncertainty changes. You're no longer asking whether you can build enough, you're asking how to manage what you've already built. And that's a fundamentally different problem. It's no longer about accumulation speed, it's now about durability, efficiency, and control over time. And many retirees don't consciously recognize that shift, even though they've crossed it financially. Part two, the shift from accumulation to coordination. Once balances get larger, retirement planning becomes less about accumulation and more about coordination. Coordination means aligning multiple moving parts that were once mostly independent. Income sources, tax treatment, timing decisions, life phases. During accumulation, most decisions are linear. You earn income, you save, you invest. In retirement, decisions become layered. Withdrawals interact with Social Security. Taxes interact with Medicare premiums. Account types interact with required rules. At lower balances, a few inefficiencies might not matter much, but at higher balances, those same inefficiencies repeat every single year. Over a 25 or 30-year retirement, repetition matters. A small inefficiency that costs a few $1,000s a year doesn't feel dramatic, but over decades, it quietly compounds into something meaningful. That's why coordination, not just growth, becomes central after 2 million. Number three, the risk shifts from markets to mechanics. See, below 2 million, market performance dominates most conversations. Returns matter more, growth matters more, volatility feels like the biggest threat. Above 2 million, mechanics begin to matter just as much and sometimes more. By mechanics, I mean how income shows up, how it's taxed, how benefits interact, and how required rules shape the plan over time. The portfolio may be large enough, but if income arrives in the wrong order, at the wrong pace, or from the wrong accounts, retirement can feel more constrained than expected. This is why some retirees with substantial portfolios still feel uneasy. They did everything right during their working years, but now the plan feels rigid. They have money, yet less control than they expected. That disconnect usually isn't about markets, it's about mechanics. Number four, taxes have become a structural issue. At higher asset levels, taxes stop becoming a once-a-year annoyance. They become a structural issue. Now, not because tax rates suddenly spike overnight, but because income starts stacking. Withdrawals layer on top of Social Security, pensions if applicable, interest and dividends, and eventually required distributions. The result usually isn't one painful tax year. It's decades of slightly higher taxes repeated year after year. And that's where efficiency quietly erodes. Not through one bad decision, but through consistent, uncoordinated income. This is why tax planning after $2 million isn't about chasing deductions. It's about shaping income flow across decades. Number 5, required rules carry more weight. Once balances are larger, required rules matter more than people expect. Required minimum distributions, Medicare-related thresholds, Social Security taxation rules. These rules don't care how carefully you've saved, they apply automatically. And the larger the portfolio, the more forcefully they shape income. A smaller account may trigger manageable required distributions. A larger account can force income whether you need it or not. After $2 million, planning often becomes less about maximizing growth and more about avoiding unnecessary friction. Well, not because growth is bad, but because forced income removes flexibility. Number 6, flexibility becomes the real asset. At this stage, flexibility often becomes more valuable than maximizing returns. Flexibility means choosing when income shows up, choosing how much shows up, choosing which accounts to use, and choosing when not to take income. That control matters. It can reduce taxes, limit stress, and preserve options as health, spending, or family priorities change. Once flexibility is lost, it's very difficult to buy back. You can't easily undo required rules. You can't easily reverse tax stacking, and that's why flexibility is often the most overlooked asset in retirement. Number 7, why doing nothing is no longer neutral. Earlier in life, doing nothing often feels harmless. Staying invested, letting accounts grow, deferring decisions. After $2 million, doing nothing is still a decision, just not an intentional one. If nothing changes, pre-tax balances continue to grow, required distributions become larger, and future income becomes less optional. Many retirees don't realize they've chosen rigidity simply by sticking with an accumulation era mindset. They didn't make a mistake, they just never shifted strategies. See, here's what most people don't expect. After $2 million, anxiety doesn't disappear, it changes shape. Instead of worrying about running out of money, people worry about making irreversible decisions, triggering taxes they can't undo, or losing control later when health or priorities change. That's why retirement planning can feel heavier even with more money. The stakes feel higher because mistakes are harder to reverse. The biggest misunderstanding is assuming more money makes retirement simpler, where in reality, more money usually means more moving parts. Retirement planning feels different after $2 million because the problem has changed. It's no longer about accumulation. It's about coordination, control, and longevity. Crossing $2 million doesn't eliminate risk. It changes the type of risk you're managing. Retirement planning at this level works best when it focuses less on chasing returns and more on preserving flexibility over time. If you're approaching retirement or already retired and want to make sure that your plan reflects this shift, you can schedule a conversation using the link below.